Hello and welcome back to On the Grid Podcast, Belgian Grand Prix edition. We will be reviewing the entirety of the Belgian Grand Prix. It felt like a very, very long race weekend, but nevertheless, we are going to dissect all the results and give our driver ratings as well as go over our predictions. So joining me as ever is the main man, Adrian. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm in a different country. I'm on holiday. You guys won't know, but from the setting, I'm in a very different setting. I'm on holiday. And before the episode even started, me and Ethan had a bit of a discussion where we didn't know who was hosting this podcast. So it could have been either of us. It could have been none of us. But here we are, looking at the Belgian Grand Prix, which lasted an entire weekend, an entire about 50 years it seemed. But yeah, now we've got the first half of the season over. We're having a bit of a summer break. But this will be the final podcast of the first half of the season. But yeah, it's a pleasure to be back. I'm with the Waffling once again. It's good to be back.
That is correct. So yeah, we'll be going through our driver 1 to 10 ratings. So if we kick things off with Max Verstappen, so a clean sweep, sprint qualified first, sprint race first, qualified on pole, started sixth though due to a gearbox penalty, but finished first. Now I've given him a 10 out of 10. He's won every single session. Actually, I'm not sure if he won practice, but if he did win practice, then it is the entire clean sweep. But yeah, he's just unstoppable. Him and it's man and machine just in absolute harmony. I don't think there's ever been Formula One domination like it. I don't think there will be for a very long time after him. He's got no competition, not even his teammate in the same machine can produce the performances he is. So yeah, 10 out of 10. The only criticism I will say is that it took him 17 laps to get the lead from starting in sixth. And that is about it. That's all you can say. So, but yeah, 10 out of 10 for me.
I did mention in the last episode that in our predictions that it would be a clean sweep for Max Verstappen, and it was exactly just that. It was just an absolutely barnstorming weekend for Verstappen once again. You can't say much more about this guy. I mean, it hurts as a Ferrari fan to keep on praising Max Verstappen, but he is that good. The machinery underneath him is good. Himself as a driver, he's fantastic. So yeah, there's no other rating. It's another 10 out of 10 for Max Verstappen. And is that back to back weekends or?
No, we got a 9.5 at Hungary. But if I
Oh,
list
okay.
off the last 7 grades, so last 8 grades, sorry. So Miami, he got a 9, Monaco a 9, Spain 10, Canada 9, Austria 9, Silverstone 9, Hungary 9.5, and then a 10 here. So we had a little bit of a disagreement last weekend.
Hmm.
We gave him a 9.5.
Still pretty good though.
Yeah, very good. And we're at the halfway point, so there will be a separate episode going through the individual driver averages from the 12 races so far. Max Verstappen's average is a 9.17. Apart from Australia and Baku, he hasn't got below a 9. It's unbelievable. It's unreal, isn't it? But now moving on to his teammate Sergio Perez. He qualified for the sprint in 8th and didn't finish. Qualified for the main race in 3rd and finished 2nd. I've gone for an 8 out of 10. I think, the fact he finished so far behind his teammate, he finished a pit stop behind, is what knocks him down a little bit. It was a better qualifying performance, not so much for the sprint race. He obviously had that incident with Hamilton, which, by the way, was a racing incident. It was 2 cars going at it, wheel to wheel. This stuff happens. The stewards have given a penalty based on the outcome of the event. Sergio Perez had to retire the car. That could have easily been Hamilton broken his front left suspension. It's not a penalty. However, it was only for the sprint race, so I'm not too upset about it. But overall, a better weekend for Checo. And yeah, he sealed the 1-2 for Red Bull. That never looked in doubt, but still he has some way to go in order to challenge Verstappen once again for the race victory.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I gave Checo an 8.5 out of 10. I think it was a much improved weekend, as you say, from his usual performances. I mean, in qualifying for the main race, obviously he qualified in third, which bumped up to second, and then took the race from Leclerc, took the race lead from Leclerc immediately. So I mean, it's a much improved weekend. Like you say, that racing incident in the sprint is a racing incident. I don't see it as a 5 second penalty in the way of Lewis Hamilton. I mean, there could have been a little bit of turning into one another, but I'm not going to say anything on that. It was very minor from the two drivers, so it was probably a racing incident. But yeah, it's a better weekend for Checo, but there's still a little bit of room for improvement to catch up his teammate 20 seconds up the road. So yeah, it's an 8.5 from me, but there's still a long way to go, I think, for Checo. And I think he needs to buckle up his ideas in the second half of the season, because there could be a certain Mr. Daniel Ricciardo knocking if performances continue to go a little bit downward in a spiral like he did in the first half of the season. So 8.5 out of 10 from me for Checo.
Moving on now to Charles Leclerc. He qualified for the sprint in fourth and finished fifth. Qualified for the main race in second and started on pole, but finished third. I'll give him 9 out of 10. I thought it was an excellent weekend for Charles Leclerc. If it was a normal race weekend and it wasn't a sprint weekend, I think he would have got a 10 out of 10. But his sprint performance just does knock him back a little bit for me, because he was quite comfortably beaten by Sainz. Got out qualified and beaten in the race. He would have finished sixth in the sprint race if Hamilton hadn't got that penalty, which, you know, he really shouldn't have, as we've just said. But apart from that, he was flawless, wasn't it? He comfortably held Hamilton at bay during the race, and yeah, it was a really good performance. And yeah, he ended the first half of the season well, and it's got a good performance going into the summer break.
Yeah, on the back of that, that's what exactly he needed to kind of finish the first half of the season. A good podium, a good performance in the sprint race, and just an overall good weekend. I think a 9.5 out of 10 for me is a rating I think that Leclerc warrants. I mean, like you said, it could have been a 10 out of 10 if it was a little bit of a better sprint race slash sprint qualifying. I think he kind of missed his chance in sprint qualifying. I think he didn't get a clean final lap in the sprint shootout. So, I mean, it could have been if that maybe higher up the field. But yeah, a 9.5 for me is a good rating for Leclerc, especially heading into the second half of the season. I think he kind of needs to bounce on this Belgian performance. But yeah, a podium to finish off the first half of the season, I think it's a positive for Ferrari. But like Checo, I think there's still a long way to go for Ferrari to be back on top once again.
Now moving on to Lewis Hamilton. He qualified for the sprint in seventh and started and finished the sprint in seventh, should I say. Qualified for the main race in fourth and finished fourth. I'll give him an 8 out of 10. Thought it was a good performance, nothing spectacular. You know, he should have really started in the top 3 or 4 for the sprint, but he got blocked by his teammate of all people. And I will just say, if it wasn't for it being Russell, or it being Hamilton that got blocked by Russell, he would have got a penalty. He would have got a grid drop. That's all I'll say on that. But the FIA are quite lenient when it comes to their teammates impeding each other for some reason. And yeah, as we said, he was unlucky in the sprint to get that penalty, which cost him 4th place, which would have seen him actually overtake Alonso in the championship standings, as it turned out. And then in the race, he was very comfortably 4th. He pitted for fastest lap, so got an extra point there. But he couldn't really challenge Leclerc. Seemed like the Ferrari had slightly better pace during the race on Sunday. But overall, a very solid weekend, good points. And can we just say, he continues to dominate George Russell. You know, if we look at the head-to-heads, in 6 of the last 7 races, Hamilton has outqualified Russell. and he's beating him on the head-to-head 9-3 in the race. So, it's a Lewis Hamilton we expect to see. He's driving at a very consistent level, and as he said himself, if he was in Perez's car, Verstappen wouldn't be as comfortable as he is right now. So that's all I have to say on that. 8 out of 10 for me, though, for Lewis.
Yeah, I think I comfortably agree with you on an 8 out of 10 for Lewis Hamilton. Like I say, it was a comfortable fourth place in the race. I am going to admit when the gap was fluctuating between 1.5 and 2, I was getting quite scared. I didn't want that Mercedes coming anywhere near that Ferrari because I know Charles Leclerc's weakness, getting absolutely sent to the shops. See you later, and it could have been a podium for Lewis Hamilton. But I mean, it didn't happen. And I'm unfortunately sitting here saying that it was Leclerc on the podium and not Hamilton. But like I say, Hamilton has been driving at a consistent basis, like we've said throughout this whole first half of the season. It's only him, Verstappen, and Alonso, the only three drivers that have scored points in all the races this season so far. So it's clearly shown that Lewis is gaining some sort of consistency once again in that Mercedes car. I could even go to as far as saying that he is gaining a bit of confidence back after, should we say, a bit of a subpar season last season. He's finally getting some knowledge and some know-how into this car and just driving at a consistent basis. So, yeah, for me, an 8 out of 10, a good performance, another solid weekend for Lewis Hamilton, and yeah, he's gunning for that third place in the championship now. I think he's got a strong foothold in kind of claiming that position to be his, even maybe catching Sergio Perez. But yeah, the second half of the season will be crucial for Lewis Hamilton, I think.
Yeah, to be honest, it would be nice to see him second in the championship, but I don't particularly see that happening. You know, Perez is a 40-point gap, and he's had, you think about the last like 6 or 7 races that he's had, I don't see him closing that 40 points. Because Perez is still finishing the race as well. But, you know, third place is definitely on the cards, especially with that Aston Martin stuttering, who we'll go on to now. Fernando Alonso qualified for the sprint in 15th and did not finish. Qualified for the race in 9th and finished 5th. Now, I've given him an 8 out of 10. I actually just changed it from a 7 out of 10 and bumped it up to an 8 because he's finished 5th in probably what is the 5th quickest car on the grid at the moment. You have to say in that Aston Martin. And to be honest, if it wasn't for the pretty bad sprint weekend, or the sprint day, should I say, on the Saturday, it probably would be a 9 out of 10 for me. You know, he was in a league of his own, comfortably in 5th, was held up by Sainz in the opening exchanges, which cost him a lot of time to those front four, who really stretched that advantage. However, once he got into 5th, he never looked like losing the position. He even endured some late pressure from George Russell, you know, cool and calm as you expect Alonso to be. And like you said, for Hamilton, these are the only 3 drivers, Verstappen, Hamilton, and Alonso, who have got points in every race. And I think it's telling because currently they are the 3 best drivers on the grid by a country mile. And yeah, it's really telling that they're the only 3 drivers to score points at every race weekend. So yeah, an 8 out of 10 for me. Another good performance.
I don't think I can give Alonso the same rating as I gave Hamilton. So I'm gonna drop it down to a 7.5 from me. I mean, his birthday on the Saturday wasn't fantastic. I mean, he had a nice little pirouette into the barrier and just didn't finish the sprint race, which was quite unfortunate. You'd want Alonso to kind of have a high on his birthday, but I think the highlight came on the Sunday, the day after his birthday, and yeah, he was just holding that 5th place down. Like you said, that Sainz incident did kind of cost him some time. So I say some time, quite a lot of time, because Sainz was just holding everyone up without side pod damage. There was an awful lot of side pod damage this weekend. Perez, Sainz, you think if these side pods quite flimsy, you get a little bit of a touch in you, and it's a kind of a race ruiner. You do kind of feel, are these cars made for any sort of contact on the side? Maybe wheel to wheel racing, yeah, they're fine. But when it comes to slight bit of contact on the side pod, it's like it's game over. It's like they're made of paper mache in a sense. Um, but I mean, Fernando Alonso, a solid weekend once again, another points finish, continuing that streak going. And yeah, I think again, if Aston Martin really need to bring some upgrades to that car because they are slowly falling down the pecking order. And if Alonso is keeping that third place in the championship, he needs some upgrades and a bit of a quicker car to compete with the likes of Hamilton and Russell and Leclerc and Sainz. So yeah, a good weekend, a 7.5 from me.
And now moving on to the other Mercedes, you've got George Russell. He qualified for the sprint in 10th and finished 8th, qualified for the race in 8th and finished 6th. Now, I thought it was a pretty poor weekend from Russell. I've given him a 6 out of 10. Two more disappointing qualifying results. He messed up not only his own result, but his own lap, but his teammates as well. And then he did make up some places in the sprint race and in the race as well. But again, he's gone from 8th to 6th. Both Sainz and Piastri retired and they both started in front of him. So there are those two positions immediately. He did go long on that first stint. He went really long. I think he was one of the last drivers to actually pit. And then fought his way through the field to finish 6th. But again, if you look at his results this season, they've not been to the level we saw last season. He's only got one podium in these first 12 races compared to his teammate who's got 4. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's been good enough from Russell, to be honest, especially these last few races where he's really he's had a bit of a uneasy few races. But so yeah, 6 out of 10 for me. Not really good enough.
Yeah, I really don't know what's been happening with George Russell lately. It's like he's gone backwards a little bit. Like he's not been performing on the Saturday, and then he just makes places up out of nowhere on the Sunday, and you just see him finishing inside of points. So I think his Mr. Saturday status has kind of gone. He's more of a Mr. Sunday overtaker now on a casual Sunday drive around Spa-Francorchamps. But yeah, I gave him a 6.5 out of 10. I still don't think he's at his best where he was last season. I think he's kind of seen. I think he's kind of like a Yuki Tsunoda ex Daniel Ricciardo from Hungary type of moment where. You're seeing your more experienced teammate perform, and you're just like a deer in the headlights, not knowing what you're going to do next. And I think that's kind of hit George Russell. He's seen Lewis Hamilton performing once again, and he just doesn't know how to respond to it. So he just needs to buckle up his ideas, refresh in the summer, and just go again and just perform his consistent self, because we're seeing Lewis perform very consistently. So I think Mercedes just need that consistency from George Russell as well to kind of balance it out between the two. So I gave him a 6.5 out of 10. Not the best weekend, but not the worst weekend. Just very average.
Yeah, I wonder if it's a little bit of he's beat Lewis Hamilton last season. And you're thinking, well, this is quite easy, isn't it? I've rocked up to a new team and beat a 7-time world champion. How hard can it be? But I think he's had a bit of a reality check just to how good Lewis Hamilton is and how driven and how hard working he is, that has seen the downfall of many a driver that he's been racing alongside. Don't think it's at that stage yet for George Russell. I think he's got at least the end of next year, but and that's not what I'm saying at all. But he needs to start performing, because you think of the mistakes he's been making as well. Look at Canada, where he cost himself a 4th place finish at worst. So I think there's a lot left to be desired from George Russell, and I think these 4 weeks could do him good to have a bit of a mental reset and get at these last sort of 9-10 races. I can't remember exactly how many they are, but it might be good for him. Moving on to Lando Norris, he qualified for the sprint race in 5th and finished 6th, qualified for the race in 7th and finished 7th, and it is not a 4th straight 10 out of 10 for Lando Norris for me. I've given him a 7 out of 10. Pretty quiet. The car struggled in the main race on the Sunday because they had a lot more downforce than the other cars. However, he recovered well and got some solid points for the team. So all in all, he was beaten on the Saturday by his teammate and on the Friday in qualifying, but it's not a bad result. Seventh place is solid points, especially from where they were at the start of the season. So 7 out of 10 for me.
Yeah, I've also gone with a 7 out of 10 for Lando Norris. I think it's just one of them weekends where McLaren were looking at the weather radar and they just went heavily downforce, heavily wet weather setup wise. And in the main race, of course, it didn't pay off because there wasn't any rain. There was a sprinkle of rain at the start of lap 18 to about lap 22, but that was about it. And he recovered well. I mean, the sprint could have been a lot more desirable as well. But I mean, we didn't get much sprint action really, did we? It was wet weather and it was very chaotic. So yeah, a 7 out of 10. It's another good weekend for Lando. But a weekend where it could have been a lot different if they didn't listen to the weather radar and just kind of went with what most of the teams around them went of just kind of just going at it straight ahead and just not solely focusing on wet weather setups. But 7 out of 10, I think, is a good enough rating anyway.
And now on to Esteban Ocon, qualified and finished the sprint race in 9th and qualified on Friday in 15th and finished 8th. I've given him an 8 out of 10. He had a very good weekend all in all when you consider where that Alpine car is and how big a gap there is between the front 5 cars and the 6th quickest car, which is what they are. He just missed out on points in the sprint, but then he made up a lot of positions in the race, pitted early for the undercut and made it work. And eighth place is a very good performance, I think, from where, how much of a struggle it is for those back 5 teams to get points at this moment in time when there's such a gulf between the front 5 and the back 5. I think an 8 out of 10 is completely fair. And yeah, a very solid weekend for Esteban Ocon.
I've given Esteban Ocon the same rating as Lando Norris, 7 out of 10. Here is my reason. The only reason I've bumped him from an 8 down to a 7 is because of his crash in qualifying into the no-name corner barrier. That is the only reason why. I mean, of course, he was going flat out, and you take that corner at around 150 to 200 kilometers an hour, which, okay, fair enough. The track was still slippy. You've got to think it through. The track is still slippy. You're not going to absolutely bomb it round. And he did just that and just kind of just clattered into the barrier and his qualifying performance was over. But all in all, again, good points. Was at the brink of points in the sprint. So it's another good weekend for Esteban Ocon. Not like the past couple of weekends where it was just double DNF. So it's a better weekend for Alpine. In all, I think they'll be happy going into the summer break with some points on the board.
And then moving on now to Lance Stroll. He qualified for the sprint race in 14th and finished 11th. Qualified on Friday for the race in 10th and finished 9th. 5 out of 10, very average. He's lined up for the race alongside his teammate on the 5th row of the grid. One's finished 5th, one's finished 9th. He crashed in sprint qualifying as well, which ruined both his and Alonso's run plan, which meant that neither one of them got through to the final part of the sprint shootout. And then he was 20 seconds behind his teammate in the race as well, despite starting next to each other. So, yeah, 5 out of 10 for me. Maybe I'm being a little bit harsh, but I think it's warranted considering how far off he was.
I know that we both hate Lance Stroll a lot, and I know that we both don't want him on the grid, but I think a 5 out of 10 is a bit harsh, saying that he's got points. I've given him a 6 out of 10. I mean, you don't usually see Lance Stroll in the points. I think that's one positive that Lance can take from a race weekend. He finished in the points, albeit obviously 4 places behind his teammate, but it's still points for the team, all in all. I don't think he deserves the criticism that you've given him. Obviously, he's made up places in the sprint. and obviously made up a place in the main race. So I think it's all in all, it's still an average weekend, but it's not that bad. It's not awful. It's not terrible. He's got points. I think Aston Martin are going to take points gladly into the second half of the season because, like we say, they need upgrades. And with both their drivers delivering points, I think that's a positive outcome for the team, nonetheless.
Are we really praising Lance Stroll for getting points in what is, by far the fifth quickest car?
Yes,
really?
Yes. Okay, think about it. If we're saying the fifth quickest car, you look at the Mercedes duo, you look at the Red Bull duo, you look at the Ferrari duo, then you look at the McLaren duo. So that's 8 places. Then you look
two of them crashed out.
Yes, okay. Then you're looking at the Aston Martin as the fifth quickest car, and you're thinking Fernando Alonso is a banker for points, so that's 9 places. And then you've got a toss up between Ocon, Gasly, Lance Stroll, Yuki Tsunoda's usually up there as well. Nico Hulkenberg performed generally okay in some races as well. So there's a toss up between so many teams. Lance Stroll, out of them 5 drivers that I've named, he's probably at the bottom of that list. So I think he does deserve a little bit of praise in general.
But okay, I can see your point, but I will just say that that car is so far clear. The top 5 teams are so far clear of Alpine, who are the 6th quickest car, that it is quite hard to credit Lance Stroll when he's being beaten by one of those cars. That's all that I would say in that matter. Moving on now to Yuki Tsunoda. He qualified for the sprint race in 16th and finished 18th. Qualified for the race in 11th and finished 10th. I've given him an 8 out of 10. He's got another point. He's had a few difficult races in recent times, and then he's obviously had Daniel Ricciardo come into the team, and I wonder whether that's just given him that little kick to really fight for that seat. And he is, he's back on the points. Let's just forget about the Saturday. It wasn't a good day. And I think if it wasn't for that, it may be a little bit higher, maybe pushing towards a 9. But he qualified well and was running in the points, but he just lost a few positions late on. So he could have been better. It could have been sort of like an 8th place finish. I think he was running 6th at one point, just to provide a bit of context to how good he was in Sunday's race. So yeah, an excellent performance, and an 8 out of 10 for me, should I say, sorry.
I've gone with a 7.5 out of 10. It was a good weekend for Yuki Tsunoda, apart from a Saturday. The Sunday was fantastic. Another point, like you say, I think I said it in last episode. I always refer to the last episode we record. And I said Daniel Ricciardo's signing for AlphaTauri on loan in quotation marks from Red Bull was kind of like a kick up the bum for Yuki Tsunoda, because I think he got a little bit too complacent with Nick De Vries finishing last pretty much every single race, or 19th ahead of Logan Sargent in most races. So I think he's kind of got a little bit back to form in a sense. The Sunday, like we say, he got another point on the board. And I think it's a valuable point for an AlphaTauri team, which is struggling a lot. So yeah, a very good performance, a 7.5 out of 10 for me. And I just think Yuki Tsunoda just needs to continue it with Daniel Ricciardo's experience and his talent. I think that AlphaTauri team is very well set up for the second half of the season, and hopefully they gain a few more points finishes, because in this sport, points finishes and finishing higher up in the championship is very valuable. And I think an AlphaTauri team kind of need as much sponsorship money and prize money that they can get, because Red Bull aren't lenient with their money, especially with their spending. So, I mean, yeah, the sister team kind of need as much money as possible. So I'm happy for Yuki Tsunoda on the Saturday. 7.5 out of 10 for me.
Well, he's moving up. He's moved up to 17th place in the championship now, Yuki Tsunoda, overtaking Kevin Magnussen, who he was tied on points for. So yeah, it's a step in the right direction, definitely. And now moving on to Pierre Gasly, qualified for the sprint race in 6th and finished 3rd. Qualified for the main race in 12th and finished 11th. Again, I've gone for an 8 out of 10. I think if you're taking, that sprint performance was fantastic. He gambled on lap one, pitting, got track position, and from there he kept it. He held off Hamilton very well on tyres which were in not a very good state, and the Ferraris were behind him as well. And then in the race, he ran long, and he was catching Tsunoda towards the end because he ran. I think he was the longest runner in that first stint, and he started on the softs. I think he went past the halfway point on those softs. Done a really good job, and then at the end on the fresher tyres, he was really catching Tsunoda. Didn't quite have the time to grab that last points position. So an 8 out of 10 for me. But what can you say? A fantastic podium in the sprint race.
Yeah, Gasly, as Daniel Ricciardo would put it. I think it was a very good impression. Would you say it was quite a good impression, huh?
Excellent impression.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, Pierre Gasly. I think after the news of Otmar Safnauer leaving, and the other team members kind of just the whole team in disarray throughout this weekend. I think a podium finish in the sprint just kind of made up for it, leaving a smile on everybody's face in the Alpine garage. I think he did tremendously in the first stint, especially as well in the race, narrowly missing out on points. But I think the Saturday just made up for it. On a whole, 8 out of 10 for me. A good performance. So like we say, the Alpines, after 2 DNFs, they came back to life in the final race of the first half of the season. And I think if they continue their momentum from this race onto the rest of the season, I think they'll easily make up ground in the championship and kind of. I don't know whether they'll challenge McLaren per se, but I think they'll finish strongly in the second half of the season. So an 8 out of 10 for me, for Pierre Gasly. A good weekend, a very good performance in the sprint, and a good performance on the Sunday to be one of the tyre whisperers of the weekend.
Yeah, I think catching McLaren is going to be a bit of an ask given their recent upgrades and just how far now they are behind McLaren after basically two good races.
That's exactly why I said it might be too much for them to finish anywhere near McLaren, but I think they'll easily get into triple figures this season. I think they will. They just need to get good qualifying performances. I think Esteban Ocon is a Mr. Saturday type of guy, and if he is back in inside the top 10, I think they'll easily do it alongside Pierre Gasly. The two Frenchmen are very, very good drivers. They just kind of need to put those 2 DNFs behind them and kind of look for inspiration from Belgium ahead of the second half of the season.
Now moving on to Valtteri Bottas, qualified for the sprint race in 17th and finished 13th. Qualified for the main race in 14th and finished 12th. Now, I think this is a little bit of a trickier one to grade. I've given him a 7 out of 10. The Saturday was pretty poor, but he still gained positions. And then he ran well on the Sunday, made it some places late on. I think he made sort of 3 or 4 overtakes in the last few laps. And he only finished sort of 5 or 6 seconds off Tsunoda in 10th. So, given another 5 laps, maybe he would have caught him. Who knows? But a 7 out of 10, a solid performance. I just don't think that Alfa Romeo is anywhere near good enough to be fighting for points.
What did I say to you last episode as well? If they could take a gearbox, whatever, every single race, I think they would, and they would be finishing inside the points. But they just can't do that. And is their gearbox gone after one race? Is it that bad in the back of the Alfa Romeo car? Can they not get points with a used gearbox? It doesn't look likely. But it's a decent weekend. I wouldn't say it's like out of the ordinary. I gave him a 6. I wouldn't say it was a barnstorming weekend, but I wouldn't say it was a crap weekend. It was just very, very in the middle for me for Valtteri Bottas. Experience, I think, is needed in that Alfa Romeo, and I think he has that. But unfortunately, he just can't translate it into a points finish anymore. it's very hard for him. But yeah, 6 out of 10. It was a decent weekend. Nothing to write home about though.
And on now to Guan Yu Zhou. Qualified for the sprint race in 19th, finished 15th. Qualified for the race in 17th, finished 13th. I've given him a 6. He same with Bottas really, but he was just slightly off his pace, so I've given him 1 grade lower, pretty much. So yeah, everything I said for Bottas I think is applicable to Zhou. Yeah, I don't think that Alfa Romeo is good enough for points at this moment in time.
Yeah, same as you. I gave him half a point lower. I gave him a 5.5. Yeah, it's for Guan Yu Zhou and for Valtteri Bottas. It's hard for them to get into the points because of how competitive the midfield is. And I don't think they're cut for the midfield at all. So yeah, a 5.5. Everything that I've said for kind of Valtteri Bottas, like you said, is applicable for Guan Yu Zhou in this rate. So yeah, a 5.5.
Moving on to Alex Albon. Sprint qualifying, he finished 12th and he finished 12th in the sprint race. He qualified in 16th and finished 14th. Now, I feel this was a little bit of a disappointing weekend for Alex Albon. Williams didn't really live up to the hype that we thought it would. You know, you think at Spa with those long straights, you think maybe they've got a chance of fighting for points, and as it turned out, they didn't. I know he was running in the points at one stage. However, that late pit stop just didn't seem to work. So instead of looking to challenge Tsunoda for that last points position as Gasly did, Albon kind of dropped off the pace despite running pretty close to Gasly for large portions of the race. So a little bit disappointing. Maybe I'm being a little bit harsh here, but I've given him a 6 out of 10. I think he maybe could have achieved a slightly higher result, certainly finishing a bit higher than the Alfa Romeos. And yeah, he really should have been fighting for points, I think, this week.
No, I think what you've given Alex Albon, I think, is a fair reflection of his weekend. I also gave him a 6 out of 10. It's not the Alex Albon consistent performance we're accustomed to see, him battling inside the points and whatnot. I mean, he was close to battling inside the points at one stage, and then he just completely dropped off. So I mean, it's once again, it's an okay weekend, but I think for Williams, we're more accustomed of them seeing on the cusp of points, not the 14th place that Alex Albon got. So yeah, I give him a 6 out of 10. It's again, it's like the two Alfa Romeos. It's nothing to write home about. But it's one of the poorer weekends for Alex Albon in a long time. So a 6 out of 10 is probably one of the worst grades we've given him in the last handful of races, I think. So yeah, it's not been it wasn't a brilliant weekend for Alex Albon. So that's why the lowly rating for him, I think.
Yeah, well, it's his worst rating since Spain, which was 5 races ago. So yeah, he's had some pretty good performances, and it's not a bad race. It wasn't a terrible race by any chance, but it was just quite average. So that kind of explains the 6 out of 10. Kevin Magnussen now, he qualified for the sprint race in 18th and finished 14th, qualified for the race in 13th and finished 15th. I've given him a 5 out of 10. You know, he was surprisingly the quicker of the two Haas's this weekend, which we haven't seen in the recent races. But still, that Haas is really, really bad, isn't it? Nico Hulkenberg has done well in qualifying, but then lost positions in the race. And it's kind of the same story here. Didn't stand much of a chance, Magnussen. Nowhere near the points and didn't look like challenging for the points either. 5 out of 10 in what is a pretty woeful.
Another agreement for the two of us. I've also given him a 5 out of 10. It's, like I say, very, very average. The Haas does not like one lap pace. And I think that's clear to see whenever we see Nico Hulkenberg hit the track. It definitely does not like one lap pace, but when it comes to race pace, it is absolutely dog. That alongside probably the Alpha Tauri, those two cars are probably, and Alfa Romeo as well, I'll probably chuck them into that category. When it comes to race pace, they look the 3 of the worst teams on the grid so far. But yeah, it was surprising to see K-Mag kind of the better of the two Haas drivers. But then again, it's nothing to write home about. Again, I use that phrase a lot. I think that's the third or fourth driver I've used it for, because whenever it comes to like kind of a lower field battle between your Williams, your Alfa Romeo, your AlphaTauri and your Haas, it's just whenever we see him kind of from the 14th downwards, we kind of say that, because whenever we see him higher than 14th, it's sort of like unexpected, out of the ordinary. But whenever they're 14th and lower, you're kind of expecting, yeah, that's where they kind of belong and that's where they should be. So Kevin Magnussen, 5 out of 10, an average weekend from his standards. I think it was an okay performance, but nothing special. Definitely nothing special.
Now, moving on to Daniel Ricciardo. He qualified for the sprint race in 11th and finished 10th, qualified for the main race in 19th and finished 16th. I've given him a 6 out of 10. This is quite a tricky one. No, sorry. Actually, no. I've given him a 5 out of 10. This is quite a tricky one. I thought he was unlucky in qualifying, because that was good enough to get him through to Q2. However, he exceeded track limits by the barest of margins. He had a fantastic Saturday and was running in the points for a few laps before George Russell ruined everyone's excitement and overtook him, later followed by Esteban Ocon. And then he didn't really stand much of a chance in the race, starting 19th. He was last of the runners, tried something a little bit different. I think he pitted early, but that didn't quite work, and he ended up sitting in 16th, not really doing too much. So 5 out of 10, maybe been a little bit harsh. It should be a 6, but I don't know. I think these 2 races for Ricciardo is more about settling into the car, getting used to it, and then doing some work over the summer break and really getting acclimatizing himself within the team, within the car, and pushing on for those last 10 races to see what he can do. But if you offered him these 2 races, coming into it, I think he would bite your hand off, because although he hasn't got the results to match, he's increased his stock with these 2 performances, I think.
I settled with a 5.5 out of 10 for Daniel Ricciardo. I think the Saturday was better than Sunday. Obviously, track limits kind of impeded him during the Friday, where he qualified kind of 19th, and from then on, the Sunday was going to be very difficult. But the Saturday was a lively one, apart from George Russell and Esteban Ocon entering the scene. It could have been a lot different for Daniel Ricciardo if it wasn't for those 2. 5.5 out of 10. I think once again it's another driver that has had a kind of an average weekend, but for Daniel Ricciardo, like you said, it's kind of getting back into the swing of things and getting back into the car and kind of getting used to the surroundings once again after what, half a season out, where it could have easily been a season if it wasn't for Mr. Nick De Vries's woes in AlphaTauri. So yeah, a 5.5 out of 10, very average. The Saturday kind of made up for the Sunday and the Friday. But yeah, I think all in all, it's just kind of for Daniel Ricciardo, it's all for what he needs at the moment is just kind of bedding back into racing back in Formula One and just kind of getting used to the surroundings. So 5.5 out of 10. Nothing special, but it wasn't the worst of the performances this weekend.
And on to Logan Sargent, qualified for the sprint race in 13th and finished 16th, qualified for the race in 18th and finished 17th. It's a 4 out of 10 for me. It's unfortunate because I think over the last month or so he has been putting in better performances, but like Hungary, this wasn't it. It'd been interesting to see what he could do in sprint qualifying if Stroll hadn't red flagged the session right at the end. But yeah, he was quite anonymous, and I think there was one point he was running close to the points, but that was more because he hadn't pit. So yeah, 4 out of 10 for me. Not really good enough. He needs to pick up his performances in the second half of the season, I think.
Also the same, 4 out of 10. Once again, we kind of said he needed to finish strong ahead of the second half of the season. And I think this was his worst performance. This was his worst performance and easily the worst thing that could have happened to him ahead of the second half of the season. kind of having a bit of a low and not being able to show what he can do on the racetrack. It's just hard for him being a rookie. Seeing Oscar Piastri thrive, seeing Nick De Vries out the door. He's the one kind of now in a kind of a precarious position, thinking if I don't pick up some points in the second half of the season, it could be me that could be going as the second rookie out of the three this season. So it's going to be hard. A lot of pressure is going to be on our shoulders ahead of the second half of the season, but he just kind of has to take it in his stride and kind of look at his old Prema teammate from Formula 3 and kind of just thrive with a chance that he's got at Williams, and make the most of things and kind of look at Alex Albon as well for inspiration. But this weekend, I think it was kind of a 4 out of 10 for me. Not brilliant. And yeah, like you say, he kind of needs to pick the performances up in the second half.
And the last of the finishers, Nico Hülkenberg, he qualified for the sprint in 20th, finished 17th, qualified for the race in 20th, finished 18th. I know he had issues in both qualifying sessions, which probably didn't help his overall race performance, because he was starting on the back foot to begin with. I think he started in the pit lane on both occasions, actually. But he was running in the points at one stage in the race. He went quite long. I think he was running as high as 8, I want to say. But, he did tumble down the order towards the end. And then I think he kind of wasn't the Nico Hülkenberg we recognise and wasn't really fighting for those positions and kind of just let the race pass him by, which is a bit of a shame considering he has been in a little bit of form recently. He's got a couple of decent performances. He got those points in Austria. So yeah, it's difficult to call, but I've given him a 4 out of 10.
Yeah, similar to Logan Sargent, I've also given him a 4 out of 10. Once again, it's not the Nico Hülkenberg we all know and love. But then again, I think his car did endure a lot of problems throughout this weekend, so he couldn't help it. And yeah, all in all, I think his race weekend was kind of plagued. I mean, he had smoke during his kind of run to the grid / pit lane before Sunday's race even started, or it might have been the Saturday sprint. I can't quite remember, but it was one of the races where he just kind of had smoke coming out of his car, and he's just gone, oh dear, I've got smoke coming out of the car. And yeah, he was always on the back foot. It wasn't a brilliant weekend, but I think Haas kind of need to help Hülkenberg because he's been the consistent driver in the team. And if they do help him a little bit, even with a tiny upgrade that can propel him into Q3 a lot more, I think Haas will maybe finish with a few more points finishes. But this weekend, it's a 4 out of 10 for me.
So moving on to the retirements from Sunday's race. First of all, Carlos Sainz. He qualified for the sprint race in 3rd and finished 4th, qualified for the main race in 5th, and obviously DNF. I've given him a 7 out of 10. I thought it was a very good weekend overall. Obviously, he had that contact at the start of the race, which he was blaming Piastri for, and I thought of the two, he was maybe more at fault than Piastri. Locking up tyres, he went down the inside and didn't really leave Piastri anywhere to go. That door shut very quickly. But overall, on Saturday, he was quicker than his teammate, Leclerc, who we've given a lot of praise for his performance over the weekend. And I think he would have been on for a good points finish had it not been for that contact at the first corner. So it's an unfortunate one. So I've not been too harsh because it was a racing incident, I believe. So a 7 out of 10 for me, taking into account all of the other parts of the weekend as well.
Taking into account all the other parts of the weekend, and also that incident with Oscar Piastri, I gave Carlos Sainz also a 7 out of 10. I mean, that lap 1 incident between the two is a racing incident, but then again, I feel that Carlos Sainz and Oscar Piastri kind of could have took it very differently, but then there's a lot of chaos into that turn 1, so it's always going to be hard with that. So yeah, I gave Carlos also a 7 out of 10, taking into consideration everything that happened throughout the weekend. It's just hard for him. with that incident. Like I said, side pods made of paper mache. But yeah, all in all, the Saturday was good. Qualifying was also decent. It was just for Sunday that kind of let him down.
Yeah, I think we're in agreement that it was more of a racing incident than either one's fault. But I think if you're going to attribute more blame to one driver, you've got to kind of say it's Sainz that has more responsibility of that incident. And then after that, the car was so slow. It was the slowest car on track by a country mile. So yeah, that's why he fell down the order and fell to last and never looked like making up any positions. And finally, Oscar Piastri, he qualified for the sprint race in second and finished second, qualified for the main race in sixth and did not finish. I've given him an 8 out of 10. I think that might be a little bit low, actually. I think maybe I should have given him a 9. His stock continues to grow. He was quicker than Norris all weekend, had that sensational Saturday where, at one point we thought he could win the sprint race, and led a number of laps. But, after, I think there was a safety car with Perez retiring, I believe. No, it wasn't. It was the safety car went in at the start and Piastri pit and Verstappen didn't. They gained the lead, and then he was doing well until, but Verstappen was always going to make that position back up and overtake him. So maybe showed a little bit of inexperience on the Sunday at the start, but I don't think it was his fault. As I've said, I think it was a racing incident and more Sainz's fault, but maybe he could have been a little bit more cautious there. So an 8 out of 10 for me for Oscar Piastri's performance.
Also an 8 out of 10 for Oscar Piastri. I think obviously he got that podium in the sprint, which you're always going to give him a higher rating. No matter what, when you get a podium, you're obviously going to get high rated. But then again, on the Sunday, it was that collision with Carlos Sainz, and I think we could have seen maybe a different outcome, maybe an 8.5, maybe a 9 for Oscar if he made it through unscathed. And it could have been a whole heap of differences for the two drivers. But an 8 out of 10, a podium, I think you're going to take that nonetheless. And yeah, like you say, his stock continues to grow. He continues to grow as a driver, and in the second half of the season, it's likely that he may get another podium. But yeah, a good weekend apart from the Sunday for Oscar Piastri.
And on now to our predictions for Spa. And I have to say, from a personal point of view, this weekend was absolutely shocking for my predictions. So first of all, for my 2-star predictions, I said Albon to get points and Norris to get pole. And obviously, neither one looked like coming true at any point. So yeah, that's a little bit of a kick in the teeth. But yeah, not great from me for that one. How about your 2-star predictions?
Yeah, so I had Albon in Q3, and we know how that went. And I had Norris podium, and we know how that went. So yeah, 2 ones that just kind of didn't come to fruition.
And now moving on to our sprint predictions. So for sprint qualifying, I said that Verstappen would qualify on pole. I said that Norris would qualify second and Piastri third. So I was almost there with Piastri, but not quite. And then I had Perez fourth, Hamilton fifth, and neither one of them were in the top 5. And then for the sprint race, I actually had Norris to win it because I was a little bit hopeful with McLaren's upgrades, and I thought they'd be run very well around Spa, but that wasn't to be. I had Verstappen second, Piastri third, Perez fourth, and Hamilton fifth. And obviously, apart from Piastri, who again, I was just the one position off with, neither Perez or Hamilton finished in the top 5. So yeah, not a great Saturday for me in terms of predictions. Do you want to give me yours now?
So for sprint shootout and the sprint, I only got Verstappen correct. In the sprint shootout, I had Hamilton second, Perez third, and Norris and Leclerc fourth and fifth. If I swap those 2 around, it could have been a 3 out of 5 for me on the sprint shootout category. And then for the sprint, like I said, I had Verstappen correct. I predicted Perez, Norris, Leclerc, and Hamilton. And again, if I swapped Hamilton and Leclerc, it could have been a 2 out of 5 with Leclerc obviously finishing fifth. So once again, on the front of the Saturday, it was poor. It was very, very poor.
And on to the main qualifying and main race. So I had Norris on pole, as I said in my predictions, my 2-star predictions. Verstappen second, Piastri third. I got Hamilton fourth, which was correct, and Russell fifth. So I didn't have the best predictions there. And then to the race, obviously Verstappen to win, I got correct. I had Norris to finish second, Hamilton third. So I was really willing him on for those last few laps, not only to get the for that extra podium, but to get me an extra point in these predictions. And then Piastri fourth, Russell fifth, and neither one of them finished in the top five, obviously.
So in qualifying, I went with the gut of Verstappen getting pole position, and it came to fruition. I had Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc in second and third. And once again, if I swapped Leclerc with Norris, it could have been another point for me. I did have Hamilton qualifying fourth, which I got, and I had Perez in fifth, and it was obviously Carlos Sainz. So I got 2 out of 5 in qualifying. And then in the race, I only had Verstappen correct, as I predicted. Norris second, Hamilton third, Leclerc fourth, and Sainz fifth. So once again, if I swapped Hamilton and Leclerc, could have been a 3 out of 5. But a whole weekend in predictions of if, buts, and maybes. No absolutes, only if, buts, and maybes. So yeah, once again, it's very poor from us in predictions. But hopefully in the second half of the season, we get a little bit better at these things.
We can only hope. I don't think we've got more than about 3 on one weekend. But just before we wrap things up, I've just seen a news flash come up, and apparently it's been reported that AlphaTauri are going to run this year's Red Bull as their car for next year, which I found quite interesting. Apparently it's not illegal to do that, and that it has been done before. I can't think of any time it's been done before. But AlphaTauri to run this year's Red Bull. What are your thoughts on that?
Very weird. But I mean, there's been lots of things flying about. I've just swiped and had a look at Google right now whilst we're recording. And there's an article from the Daily Express saying Lando Norris confirms McLaren exits. Forza's Red Bull rumors swirl. So Lando Norris could be on his way out. I've seen also that I think Hugo Boss is sponsoring AlphaTauri as well. Alfa Romeo pulling out of the Sauber partnership. It's all happening. It's officially silly season. Silly season has kicked in. Everybody's getting bored. It's the summer break. But back on the AlphaTauri point, yeah, I don't think it's illegal, but it is a bit dodgy, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. Especially because Red Bull are looking to sell AlphaTauri. They don't want 2 teams anymore. So, as you said, Hugo Boss looked like the prime contenders at the minute to sponsor the AlphaTauri team. So it's very weird that they would give them their old car. But if it did happen, I think AlphaTauri would get a fair few points next season. That's all I'm going to say. Maybe even a few podiums, and maybe we'll see Daniel Ricciardo back on the podium. But who knows? I have heard that actually Alfa Romeo are going to sponsor Haas from next season. I've heard that circulating around the rumor mill as well. But we will find that all out with time. Thank you all for listening along to our podcast and our washed predictions. And we will see you next week, and we will continue to provide content over the summer break. Thank you for listening.